So today, I want to just share a little bit about my story of becoming a product manager at Twitch. It's not a super conventional story. I dropped out of freshman year in college to start a company that completely failed. And then I started another company in the esports space, raised a few $1,000,000, went through Y Combinator. And then we grew up to a team of 15 people. Then we were forced to pivot. Then we were about to raise our Series A. And then we ended up selling and joining another company. So I'll walk you through the whole process, what I learned through each step of the way, and hopefully you can learn a thing or two from it. So the first company was a company called Beyond Intelligence. You can tell it's a name that came up from a college freshman. And basically what it was I was in school. A lot of the other kids who I knew from other schools that were super smart were all dropping out of school. So I was like, wow, this thing is kind of cool. Maybe I should do that too. At the same time, wearables was blowing up. This was the time when Apple Watch was getting popular, Fitbit was getting popular. And so what I decided to do was go apply for a program, drop out of school, and just do it. And so what ended up happening was we spent 6 months spinning around, essentially not getting any traction, not being able to do anything because I started with the wrong reason to start a company. And obviously, just starting a company because you think it's cool in an industry that you think is also attractive is a terrible idea. But I think one thing that I learned from this process was that if you want to start a company, you have to have a thesis about the world. And the thesis about the world generally starts with a core customer problem and a solution, so everybody knows that. But the difference between having a problem and solving for the problem and a thesis for the world is how you think the world will change the next 5 or 10 years, and your entire product strategy would evolve around that thesis for the world. And so I'll give you an example with my first company. So this is my team, my first company, our second company now, because my first company failed completely. So the second company is a company called Revlo. Our thesis for the world was that entertainment was going to become more and more decentralized and more interactive. And so if we think about entertainment today, there's a lot of TV networks. This was also 4 or 5 years ago, when YouTube and Twitch hasn't gotten as big as it has now. The thesis was that, we're going to move away from television networks producing these high budget productions and move more towards content creators making, low budget content that is more interactive. And what I mean by interactive also means during a live experience, when you actually watch someone stream, what is magical is when you type something into chat, and so you're watching the stream, you type something into chat, and then the streamer responds to you. And that feedback cycle was the aha moment for me. And so when I started using Twitch, because I played a lot of video games, I realized, wow, this is really, really cool. When no longer am I just sitting behind a computer screen waiting for content to be pushed to me, there's actually kind of like a push and pull. I'm interacting with other people who are also watching the stream from all over the world. And then the streamer who's sitting behind the stream is actually interacting with me. So they are changing the way they play the game based on what I'm typing in chat. They're answering the questions I've always had because I don't know how to be as good as they are. And that was kind of the aha moment, and that sort of drove the thesis that, hey, the world is going to move towards decentralized entertainment that's live and interactive. If I believe in that thesis, what can I do as a company to address that? And so we started off building a little bot on Twitch. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with what chatbots are, but essentially now with Slack, I guess everybody is familiar. But basically a chatbot just responds to chat commands. And so what we built was literally this IRC bot that responded to viewers typing in !gamble. And so viewers would earn these points while watching streamers. And then all they did with our program was type in !gamble. We'd roll an RNG dice, and depending on what they rolled, they would get points. So a super simple product, but it solved this core problem for customers, which was as a streamer, how do we engage my viewers when there's a lull in the stream? So if you think about a live stream, right? I'm streaming myself playing the video game. There are times where the game is really exciting, when I'm killing people and fighting. But then there's also times where it's not super exciting, when I'm queuing for my next game. And so this little bot that all it did was roll a dice was able to solve this problem where during the downtimes of these interactive live streams, it was impossible to engage the audience. And so we built this thing, and within a few months, we had hundreds and thousands of viewers rolling this dice on Twitch. And so then, we went back and said, okay, what is our next product? How do we iterate this to be more than just a bot that rolls a dice? We kind of went back to our thesis and said, okay, if our thesis is that entertainment is going to become more interactive, how do we evolve our product? So then our answer was, well, now people have these points. What if they could do something with those points? What if now with those points, you can actually request the streamer to do something and guarantee them to do something? So for example, now, instead of just rolling 1,000 points, you can use those 1,000 points to request for a song to be played on stream. So now everybody else gets to listen to the favorite song that you loved listening to when you were a kid. Or you get to spend 10,000 points, and you can go into the streamer's stream and play a game with them. And so you get your 5-minute of celebrity fame. And so we built that, and we continue to sort of iterate on this thesis that streaming and entertainment is going to become more interactive. And that's and we became super obsessed with this problem. And what ended up happening was we had a really shitty looking product. Like, this is pretty crappy. I mean, you compare this to any of the consumer websites that you use on a daily basis, it is pretty bad. The user experience was also pretty poor in that every time you went and started streaming, you needed to go to our website, click on this button called Deploy Revlo Bot, and then you need to make sure you killed Revlo Bot at the end of your stream, because if you didn't do that, next time it came back, it would be super unresponsive. So it was terrible. But because it solved a really core customer problem for users, this product you see today, we had around 10 million users just using this. And so the key sort of takeaway that I got from this Revlo experience is that if you have a thesis about the world, and that thesis is sort of true, which comes from a core customer problem and solution, if you are solving a really big problem for your customers, UX, UI don't really matter that much. As long as you are obsessive about solving that core problem, you will be able to get product market fit. And that's the most important thing at an early stage for any product. So what happened? So about 2 years in, we got an offer to be acquired by one of the 3 big streaming platforms. Mixer used to be just Microsoft. Now it's Mixer. Twitch is Twitch, and YouTube Gaming is obviously Google. And what happened was we got this offer. We were cocky young kids who thought we can build $1 billion company. And so we turned it down. But in the process of turning it down, we kind of looked at the market and said, okay, what is our company really valued? And what we realized was that it was actually pretty tough to value our company, because our data sources completely relied on the third-party platforms. So what I mean by that is, in order for us to get data on how many minutes you are watching a stream to earn those points, and those points was the underlying for the gambling, for the ability to interact with streamers, to play mini games with other viewers, we can't get that data if the platforms don't give us that as a data stream. And when we talked to all these companies, what they kind of told us was, well, you should take the offer now, because if you don't, we are going to start tightening up the pipeline. So you won't be able to get the data you want. And when we realized that, we kind of said, wow, if you shut off the data sources today, we're literally screwed. Our company will not exist. And so it was a pretty hard learning lesson, because the one question that we didn't answer this time around, so the first startup taught me to ask, what is the thesis? But the second time, what this taught me is not asking what is our highest risk hypothesis. And so the highest risk hypothesis for this company was that we needed platforms to provide us their API either for free or through a partnership. And we didn't realize, as obviously as it sounds now, looking back, that was a critical part of our business. And so that's kind of lesson number 2, which is if you are starting a company or building a product that you want to scale to billions of users, not only do you have to have a thesis about how the world works and your product needs to revolve around that, but 2, you need to ask, what is the one reason that your company or product will fail? And making sure that you are not only obsessively solving the problem for customers, but also obsessively trying to validate if your highest risk hypothesis is true or false. And so took this lesson, and we basically said, at that time we had 15 people. We said, okay, still got a couple $1 million in the bank. Can we go and try this again? I feel like we've learned a lot, so let's try this again. So we laid off 80% of our team, went back down to sort of 4 or 5 people. And we were like, okay, let's just brainstorm and throw shit on the wall and see what sticks. We played a lot of video games. I spent hours every day just playing games because we didn't know what to do. One thing I was doing was I was playing Overwatch. It was a video game by Blizzard, and I was climbing in this game trying to get better and better. And so I started off being like a really bad player, and then after spending like hours playing the game and spending hundreds of dollars on coaching sessions, I was able to climb to sort of the top 0.3% of the player base. And with that, I kind of realized, okay, well, there's lots of other people who are out there trying to improve at the game like I do. Not a lot of them are spending hundreds of dollars on coaches. And most of them are probably not spending 6 hours, 8 hours a day playing games because they have nothing else to do. And so what if we kind of took that sort of problem solution, try to see like what can we extract from there about the world and where the world can go. And the thesis there was that the esports is going to get more popular, and as esports gets more popular, there is going to be a equivalent to professional sports as there will be to professional esports. So just like how kids grow up looking at LeBron James as their celebrity and playing basketball and going for training camps and buying equipment, there must be a similar equivalent in esports. And so that was our sort of thesis. And our highest risk hypothesis was, okay, well, if we were to do this training thing, the publishers, who are the people who own the games, shouldn't be able to shut us down like the Twitch, YouTube, and Google that was able to do the last time. So what if we built our own technology for computer vision? So the idea was, if we were to build an AI coach that looked at a person's gameplay by analyzing their video game footage and giving insights to players based on that by comparing their gameplay patterns to those of professionals, are we able to build a sustainable company that can be killed by the platforms and to also continue to evolve to become bigger and bigger and scalable? And so we did that, and we were able to get a lot of traction. We partnered up with the teams that own all the sort of Overwatch League teams. So Overwatch League is the franchise version of the sports. These teams are owned by like Comcast, owned by the guys who own the New England Patriots, essentially all these really massive companies and organizations. We partnered up with half of the 12 national teams for Overwatch. So they have the World Cup, just like they do in soccer. So a ton of traction. We're growing 10% week over week. And kid you not, I was coming back from an Uber meeting where I just handshook on a deal for a Series A. And then I get a message from one of my streamers who said, hey, is Pursuit banned? I'm like, what? Are you trolling? Like, there's no way. And then I keep getting these messages from my co-founders as well. They're like, yo, have you seen this? And then I find out that basically the publisher sent an email to every single one of our users who used our product and said, if you continue to use Pursuit, your account will be permanently suspended. And what they ended up doing here was they actually changed their EULA, so end user license agreement, and because they own the IP of the game. So this is the third lesson here, which is understanding the industry that you play in. Nobody owns basketball. Nobody owns soccer. If you build a company in sports, they can't change the rules of that sports and like screw you. But games are owned by publishers, and they own all the IP for it. And so they can literally just say, we own this game, we don't want anybody to even touch it, and ban you as a result. And so we got banned, and I went to kind of a couple of the companies that we turned down the offers on, and was like, hey guys, we're kind of, we screwed up. I would love to have an opportunity to chat again. And we got a couple of offers, and we ended up joining Twitch January of this year, so a few months ago. And so we really wanted to join Twitch for a couple of reasons. One, Twitch is obviously a leader in the market. But two, I really wanted to understand why Twitch, who also is built on third-party IP, was not killed by the publishers, right? Because they're streaming, they don't own these games. So why is that? And so I had a conversation with Emmett, who's the founder and the CEO. And what he told me was basically understanding what is the value proposition you are providing in the marketplace in relation to other partners. So for Twitch, there's a couple of things they do for publishers. One is they give them free marketing. If you stream your game on Twitch, other people who play other games are able to see that, and then the publishers get free marketing. Two is this idea of kind of UGC, which is user-generated content. User-generated content is really expensive. Building content is generally a really expensive proposition. But Twitch allows the publishers to essentially get user-generated content for free. And so kind of thinking back and comparing that to our startup, which was providing AI coaching, what was the value that we were offering to publishers? Not really that much. I mean, we're helping their players get better, but that doesn't really help them make more money. It doesn't really help them do much. And so kind of wrapping that up is basically when I'm thinking about the last learning lesson before we joined, is like understanding not only the industry, but what is the power dynamics? Who controls the shots? In gaming, it's publishers. In other industries, it works differently. And then really asking yourself, what is what is your relationship with those power makers in the industry? And how do you add value / take away value from their business? And so, it's the easy learning lesson from this maybe is you never build something on top of other people's platforms. But that's literally not possible. Like everything you build, if you're building an app, you rely on the App Store. And so like if you're building any Windows application, you're relying on the operating system, right? I think the key learning lesson to take away from all this, at least for me, when I'm thinking about my next company, and even when I'm thinking about building products at Twitch, is understanding what are, again, the power players in the industry. What is the value you're adding to all of those in addition to your customers? And then whether or not the value you are creating is extracting value away from any of the other key partners. In the case of an analytics product, we were, because that was something that the publishers could have easily done and built statistics into their game. A publisher can't really build their own streaming platform because a streaming platform is only powerful when there are multiple games on it. A publisher can't really easily build user-generated content because you need content creators to do it. So that's that. And so to kind of summarize whatnot, the first company, which didn't go anywhere, is because I did it for the funsies, wanted to be cool, follow what the cool people did, didn't have a thesis for the worldview, which is why I failed. And then second company with Revlo, we gained tons of traction, but we never asked ourselves, what are the highest risk hypotheses? And then with Pursuit, which we got traction, we had defensibility, but we didn't really understand the power dynamics of the industry. And that's what killed us. So yeah, I think that's it. If you have questions, we'd love to answer them.
I would like to say thank you, because it's very interesting. And as far as I understand, now you work in Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you're saying that probably you're going to build your own company, another one.
Mm-hmm.
So is it, sorry, my English is not...
That's totally fine.
Yeah, but as a product manager, what is the best choice? What do you think? To build your own company or to build, something inside of a big player? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think it depends on what you're trying to learn. For me, I think at a startup, you get to learn everything super, super quickly, but there's not much structure and process to things. And in order for you to be successful at a small company, you really have to come up with a solution to a really, really big fucking problem. At a big company, a lot of innovation really is taking what the community has already built and just kind of like building it yourself. Like, if you think about a lot of the innovations that we'll use past examples of Twitch. There's feature called Clips on Twitch that has a lot of usage. Clips was something that a third party did, and it generated a ton of user action, and so we took it and we built it. And similarly, think about Revlo and the products I've built as well. Is like at a big company, it's really more about execution and taking a creative idea that someone else has built and making sure it works at scale. At a small company, it's more about customer discovery, really understanding the problem, and then solving it. And so that's from a learning perspective. And two is just really what you want. I mean, I'm a lot more chill now at Twitch than I was working on my company. I should go home at night and have fun the weekends. And so that's something else as well. Yeah.
Again, also thank you for this presentation. What are you tasked to do now at Twitch?
Mm-hmm. So
and what what's cool that's going to be happening with Twitch that you can look forward to?
Yeah. So the stuff I'm working on at Twitch is related. I can't really talk about it, but it's related to the stuff I was working on before. And so this again is about big companies taking things that communities have built that are really, really smart and interesting and being able to execute at scale. So I'm doing that. Exciting things at Twitch to look forward to. I think obviously there's that big news recently where Ninja moved from Twitch to Mixer. I don't think it's a big deal because I think there's a lot of really exciting things we're doing around audience interaction, which really takes this idea of just sitting behind a screen, watching, to you actually interacting with the streamer to the next level. And that's kind of the area that I'm focused on, is how do we make it so that it doesn't ever feel like you are sitting behind a screen. And Emmett's, so our CEO's kind of motto for this, it feels like you are at a campfire, sitting around a bonfire and hanging out with other people. Super, super like cheesy, but that's kind of the idea Twitch is trying to go after.
You mentioned, at least with your first company, that you didn't really focus very much on UX design.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious if you could say more about how your relationship was with UX and like building the product that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess it makes sense like when you're like really first starting out.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I'm not going to really focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like that would be something that's really central to making a product that some other company might want to buy.
Yeah.
And I came to an event here not like 2 weeks ago maybe, and there was someone else from Twitch.
Oh, nice.
Talking about developing the plugin,
okay.
The plugin system, and talking about that they didn't really work with UX designers.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Really screwed them over.
Yeah.
So what's up with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why aren't you working with UX designers? As a designer here, I'm like, why aren't you?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So one of my co-founders had a design background, actually, so we didn't completely ignore it. But I think we were more focused on thinking about how do we, what's the thing? We didn't really have a simple user experience. What we were basically operating from was we talk to users, we recognize they have this problem, and we solve that problem for them. In whatever the most elegant way we can think of it is, but we weren't really concerned with optimizing that experience. So at a company like Twitch, if you optimize something by 0.1%, that represents a lot in terms of like moving retention numbers or revenue numbers. At a small company, if you like make the UX a little bit better, you might be moving the metrics up by like 1%, 2%, but you could make much more monumental leaps by building a new product feature. And so obviously it gets to a point where once you get to a certain size and scale of users, those things don't apply anymore. So I don't think it's really much of a UX and UI is not important. It's more, I think, at a startup when there's more low-hanging fruits and you understand there are like gaps in the market that like in terms of just not even solving the problem, then it's more important to solve the problem for the customers than to solve it more elegantly compared to the existing solutions or your previous solution. Today we work with designers a lot. I love our designers because it does matter because now, and the other thing too, if you think about your customers, when you're at a startup, most of the people using your product are early adopters, and they will figure shit out themselves. yeah, they're very forgiving and they'll talk to you and whatnot. Now, if we launch a product at Twitch that has poor UX UI, our support tickets go out. People get pissed, and they most time already are, and and they'll just complain over Twitter. And so it's also like the customer base as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Based on your experience, how easy is the product manager when you change your product strategy? How easy it is to do that?
So do you mean at a big company, small company, what?
A company like Twitch.
So full transparency, I mean, I've only been at Twitch for a few months, so I don't know how exactly like changing a product strategy would impact a PM's day-to-day. But based on my experience here, I think a lot of times PMs at companies are focused more on delivering a certain feature. And so if the product strategy changes, it probably doesn't impact them that much because Twitch is not even considered like a massive company, right? It's got 1,500 people. It's not like 10,000 to 20,000. Even at the 1,000, 2,000 scale, it feels like as a PM, you're pretty siloed compared to what the company strategy is, because once you write a spec, you're just kind of responsible for executing it. I don't know if that answers your question or if you're trying to get at something else.
Well, the example,
yeah.
Twitch started at Justin TV.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, that at one time, it was like, it was garbage. People considered Justin TV as garbage, period.
Mm-hmm.
And then within a certain amount of time, the value went from $1 million to $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, not a lot of companies can sustain that, being able to, just hang in that long. So that was really what I was trying to get.
Gotcha.
As a product manager, how do you?
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So we have our partner at Y Combinator was Justin Kahn and Mike Siebel, who were co-founders of Twitch. So we were lucky to kind of understand sort of the story of how Twitch became a $1 billion company from very small. It's not as straightforward as just hanging on. It's also they had a lot of different iterations of the product. What at least I've learned from them, based on sort of the lessons they've taught me, is that they always had this thesis of like things are going to be live, right? The Justin TV started as live streaming myself. So it started with Justin having a big camera on his forehead and running around and filming. And then they had essentially the split where they saw there were some people streaming video games, and they saw there were some people streaming themselves just talking. There's obviously some people streaming illegal content. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. And then what they did was they looked at essentially the data, and they actually couldn't decide whether or not to do the gaming side or the live streaming real life side. And so then they actually sort of split it up, where there was Twitch, which focused on gaming, and then Mike Siebel went out and did Social Cam, whatever. There's another company which was more focused on sort of live streaming the real life stuff. And so, but like what stayed consistent through all that is the company strategy, which is to focus on live interactive entertainment. The way that they implemented it changed, but that's just, you can just do that through testing. So I don't know if that helps understand. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have any process to decide whether to pivot or persevere?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think, there's a bias story. If someone perseveres and their company becomes successful, it's like this hero story of them persevering. But most of the time, they'll persevere and nothing comes out of it, and it's like shitty, right? So I don't think there's a process. I think it comes down to a couple of factors. One is how your team still feels about the idea. I think that's actually like frequently underlooked. One of the reasons we decided to join another company rather than continuing on and raising a smaller seed round was our team just burned out. Like honestly, after 3 years of working really, really fucking hard, building 2 products that get millions of users and then just getting slapped because the third party, because we were too dependent, like we were just burned out. And so maybe if we persevered and continued to build AI analytics for esports, we might have been successful by working with another publisher, because recently there's a couple companies who raised a few $1 million doing it. But just like personally, we weren't the right people to do it anymore. And then 2, I think it's also just not just how people feel, but whether or not the team still has the ability to execute on the vision. Because a lot of times as a startup, you start up with one idea, and then you pivot, and you pivot, and you pivot, and you pivot, like micro adjustments. But then by the time you're like at the end, you're like pretty different from where you started, right? We started out building a gambling bot on Twitch, and then we ended up at doing a computer vision-based AI coach. So like they're pretty different. And so like at that time I realized, okay, well, like our team is also just, not only are we like burned out, but we also are just not the right experts at tackling this space anymore. And then lastly, from a product perspective, I think that's just really comes down to your conviction in the space and your thesis. Like, do you still believe in the thesis that you started off building the company with?
One more question. What did you guys do with Pursuit? Did you try to kind of overcome that objective and take it somewhere? Or?
Yeah, so we went and partnered up actually with Riot. So that's League of Legends, which is another really big game. And then Fortnite, which you guys know recently, Fortnite World Cup, the 16-year-old won $3 million. And they were more open to building it. But the response we got was they were not willing to kind of formally give us any like agreement where they'll say they won't ban us for like X number of years. And again, at that point, like based on our prior response, our team just felt super burned out that unless we had this like guarantee that this partnership will happen, we just didn't want to go through the risk of having it again. And with the idea of big company life and security on like the horizon, we just couldn't take it anymore. So we just went the other way. Yeah, go ahead.
How would you see your team scale over time? So you sound like you started off like with a basic vision, and then you guys scaled and became bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
How did you scale? Like, how many people did you have before you got slammed, obviously?
Yeah.
And what was like the team dynamic, and how did you keep everyone's expectations and everyone aligned on the vision?
Yeah, great question. So we started with 3 of us, and then we grew to 15 when we got slammed. And so the scaling process at startup, I think, is actually really, really important because it also determines on whether or not you guys at the end of the day will have an exit. Basically, talent is super coveted in the Valley. Big companies are always lacking good talent. So even if your product ends up failing, I think if you have a really, really smart team, there will be some sort of exit somewhere. And so how we scale that, I think if you start, and this is kind of like a snowball effect. If you start off with really, really smart people, then the people they have in their network is generally pretty smart. And I think up until you grow to like 50 people, you should probably mostly be hiring from people within your network. Should be, unless you're like requiring like some expert from another sort of domain. So we had we had a professor at University of Toronto who was specialized in economics who joined us. He obviously wasn't from within our network, but we needed him for the expertise of understanding how economies work virtually. But I think that's on the scaling for talent, and then keeping everybody aligned. That's something that we were pretty sort of vigilant about. And one of the ways we did is every month we had something called a vision day, where we just took our vision document and made sure that, which starts off with the thesis that we believe that world will become, vision, mission, all that kind of stuff, values, and just made sure everybody was aligned on it on a monthly basis. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Thank you again for
that
very interesting story. I guess I have 2 questions. One is, do you mind talking a little bit more about the competitive landscape, like how does Twitch distinguish itself from others? And actually, I'm curious, do you see there are some benefits you get from the competitors being in this whole esports ecosystem?
Yeah.
And the second question is, apparently you talked about the power play.
Yeah.
There are publishers, there are streamers, there are audience.
Yeah.
And apparently you're trying to deliver value to all of them. But if you see a lack of alignment, if that's the case, like how do you balance?
Good question. So first question, actually let's talk about the competitive landscape question first. So when we think about, so Twitch is in a very lucky spot in that, so the title of the talk was called Building Something with a Moat. And so this idea of a moat is really interesting because once you build a moat, which is high barriers of entry for other competitors, you don't necessarily need to actually differentiate yourself on a feature perspective. So if you think about, so there's YouTube gaming, there's Mixer, and then there's Twitch. From a feature perspective, honestly, they're all pretty much the same in that there's a chat room, there's a video. There might be micro differences in how there's payouts to streamers. There might be micro differences on how viewers earn status and interact with each other. So on Mixer, you can earn a global currency that can be spent on the streamer's channel, so that you can make them like trigger a sound effect or something like that. They basically have Revlo built into their system. On YouTube gaming, it's more about being able to go directly from a live stream to a video on demand, so one of the offline YouTube gaming videos, sort of seamlessly. Now on Twitch, it's sort of all focused on the live experience. But at the end of the day, the experience of sitting there and watching the streamer and interacting is the same. But because Twitch had product market fit early, if you remember a few years ago, YouTube tried to buy a bunch of streamers from Twitch. They spent millions and millions of dollars, and they all came back to Twitch because the audience, the community stayed at Twitch. And so Ninja's moved over from Twitch to Mixer. His audience, majority of them are still on Twitch, and so that's kind of the way to think about these network effect-based companies. So network effect is the more users you have, the more valuable your platform becomes. If you build that network effect, even if your feature doesn't differentiate when you scale up, it doesn't matter because the viewers stay. And so, the reason why we joined Twitch was to make it so that experiences aren't similar anymore, but today they're pretty much the same. And it doesn't matter because of this moat they've built. Sorry, what was your second question again?
The question is if there's a conflict.
Oh, conflict.
Yeah, so for different players having that.
Yeah, so it really comes down to from a power dynamics perspective, how much power each person holds. So for example, the publisher holds the most power, right? Because they own the IP of the game. So you have to make sure that they won't shut you down. So make sure they're satisfied first. And then in Twitch's perspective is the streamers, because without the streamers, it doesn't matter if you have the viewers. I know people say it's kind of a chicken egg problem, right? There's a two-sided marketplace. There's viewers and streamers. You can't really have one without the other. But Twitch's perspective is creators should be first. And because if you have the creators, they will build those communities. And then it sort of switches, right? The switches that then the communities are on Twitch. And if the creators leave Twitch, then they'll stick around. And so it also kind of changes over time. I think I don't really have a perfect framework in thinking about this, but the way I think about it is just you kind of go down the order list. You can't piss off anybody, but you want to satisfy the most powerful parties first. Cool. Oh, go ahead.
Do you look back at college as a waste of time or a waste of opportunity?
I don't. I think college was fun. I'm gonna be honest. I didn't learn anything in college that helped me do what I'm doing now, but I think it's also college is not college is right for most people. I got pretty lucky. I'm gonna be honest. I got pretty lucky in that I happened to play a lot of video games at a time when esports got bigger, and I had some really good friends who are really, really smart people I was able to start a company with and was able to have a good outcome. If we didn't have a good outcome, I would 100% go back to college. So, yeah.
You said you dropped out of college.
Yeah.
And the question I do have is, did you go to a prep school?
A prep school?
There's a statistic that comes out that says most people that drop out of college, basically they went to prep school. That means they have the network.
Mm.
They're able to have the network in that school. So that
No, I didn't go to prep school. I went to a public school in Toronto.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's one question to apply that you just mentioned that you happen to play a lot of video games.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that is why you really naturally come up with the thesis of the worldview.
Sorry, say that again? This is because I played video games?
Yeah, that's my assumption.
Yeah.
You happen to build a game, and that's why you have the point of view about the worldview.
Yeah.
But I wonder, because I really love your first story about developing the thesis of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have actually, after a long time, do you have a process or maybe some stuff for people, maybe not really stick with an
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I mean, I'm trying to come up with more theses about the world as I'm thinking about my next steps too. I'm trying to come up with ones that are also not just in the gaming industry because of the screwed up power dynamics. And so one thing is talking to a lot of really, really smart people. So, if you know other people who are really, really experts in industry, they usually, if they're not thinking about like the world from like a thesis perspective, they will actually subconsciously have a thesis about the world that you just have to kind of like dig out of them. And so if you just basically like, if you have a friend who's like super into real estate, for example, it's like I have a friend who's super into finance. You sit down with him for like 30 minutes or her for 30 minutes, and you kind of just say like, what gets you excited about the space? Where do you think the space is going to go in 10 years? Who are the players? Who are the market makers? Just ask all these questions that you naturally think would be required to come up with a thesis of the world, and just talk to as many of these people as possible. And over time, you start to absorb them, and you can like kind of piece them together. The other thing sort of that's good for this is also just looking at other companies in this space. There's obviously AngelList, there's Crunchbase, looking at some of the other companies in areas you're really, really interested in. And you can kind of see a pattern, right? So like in esports right now, the pattern is training. So like there's a couple of companies that have recently raised money. PlayVS, which does high school esports. Another company today just raised $3 million doing training for esports. And so like you can already see a pattern, right? And so if you do this for any industry you're interested in, you can like develop something basic, talk to smart people, flesh that out, and then sit down and think a little bit harder, and then maybe you'll come up with something new. Yeah, good.
How do you balance data and gut instinct?
Data and gut instinct. It's a good question. I think the differentiator between a good entrepreneur and a bad one is being able to make decisions with imperfect data. I skew a little bit more towards using data than gut instinct because that's just the way I think. But I don't think there's a right answer. I think as long as the one thing that is never wrong is listening to your customers. So if you have a gut instinct, or if your data is telling you something, go talk to the people that you're solving the problem with, and they'll generally validate for you whether or not it's true. And so that's usually how I sort of decide between the two. Yeah, person in the back.
I have a question of how do you think the content aggregation that's happening inside of the media industry right now is going to affect the esports, basically streaming consumption?
So what do you mean by content aggregation?
All the brands are basically gobbling up as much as they can. So they're going to eventually turn their eyes to esports, Twitches, and stuff like that. How do you think that's, like the Disney's, the Foxes, how do you think they're going to be affected by that? Because they're going online.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. I think when we think about Twitch, there's, or live streaming in general, there's like premium content. So that's the stuff where it's like the massive esports tournaments, Fortnite World Cup. And then there's like a super long tail of like small creators. I think generally it's pretty tough for big brands to swallow up the long tail, right? Because the creators all have different needs. There's been things like MCNs that have been created in the past, which are called multi-channel networks, which are essentially agencies that try to manage multiple content creators. What ends up happening is like a lot of these creators, maybe as they get more professionalized, maybe it's going to be more of a thing, but the creators are all really, really small that it doesn't actually make sense for like a big company to manage like a bunch of them. So talent agencies work, but generally work because they're like managing a couple of superstars. And so I think that the Foxes of the world, the Disneys of the world, they might come over and get broadcasting rights to the super premium content. And Twitch and existing streaming platforms will fight them for it. But I think what differentiates just watching a big sports game on TV, or even if you watch it like on a big network, compared to like watching it from a site that is built on top of its community, is the interactions that happen in chat are going to be different. So on Twitch, to give you an example, there's all these memes that are like only Twitch understandable. So like there's a language of the platform. And so if a competitor comes in and they're just a big media property that just has premium content, I don't think that community aspect will be there. And so the experience of actually watching will be different if we do think the piece of interacting with the other fans is an important part of the experience. Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
So apparently you're very passionate about games and sports. You also mentioned that this food power play might be something that make you think about the next step.
Yeah.
Would you say that's your biggest frustration about the field? If that's so, do you see players like yours in the company or Twitch could potentially change that landscape?
Good question. Definitely, it's the most frustrating. I think when one company has almost all the publisher has all the power on anything related to their game, it's a frustrating experience. It doesn't drive much innovation. Can Twitch or a streaming platform change it? Yes, I think that's one of the reasons why, and this is just my assumption, why Amazon acquired Twitch in the first place. It was because Amazon had this thing called the Amazon Game Studios. They looked at the gaming industry, which is $122 billion, and they were like, why don't we have a piece of this? And so they thought, well, if we can integrate the streaming and the game production in the same vertical, then we can take away essentially the power away from the publishers. Amazon Game Studio never delivered on a game. So I think that's more of a competence perspective, but I do think a lot of these streaming platforms could potentially go in the way of building their own games and to distribute the power. I think indie games are also getting more and more popular nowadays because AAA games are so focused on monetization. So I have hope in the industry. There's trends that will go there, but who knows? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, nice.
What is most important role for the CEO, and what is most important for product management?
So I think generally at a startup, the CEO is a product manager. I think generally, when you're small. Also depends on your sort of background. I mean, I know I have friends who are more technical and the friends who are less technical. And so if you're a CEO who's more technical, you should be more involved in the design of the tech. And then if you're a less technical CEO, you should go out there and call customers and onboard them. I think the sort of the core trend across all, I think, regardless of your background, is what do you think is going to be your biggest value add to the company? And so if you think your biggest value add to the company today is to raise money, and you're the only one that can do it, you should dedicate most of your time doing that and delegate the rest of your job. If you've just raised money and you need to hit that goal that an investor have set for your Series A or Series B, then if it's hiring people, which generally becomes most of the CEO's job as it scales bigger, like when we're at 10 people, most of my job is just trying to find talent because that's the most needed thing to grow, then that's your job. If you need to actually fucking get a product out the door, then you should sit down and code and get that shit out the door. And so as a CEO, it's much more flexible as a role. As a PM, I think the most important thing to do as a PM is deliver on your team's metric. And so if your team has a goal of hitting revenue targets, you should do whatever you can to hit metrics. And so that's a little bit more simplistic. One point I would have to say though, as a PM at a big company, I think one of the most important skills that I underlooked when coming in was just writing skills. And so, at my startup, writing didn't really matter because you're like sitting next to each other, and you don't need to communicate written, maybe for investor updates, but you can always just grab coffee. But at a big company, when you are communicating your spec to your engineers who you might not even see on a daily basis, you likely won't, to some other team who needs to understand your product so they can build into it. The only thing they'll see is that 4 pieces of paper that is your product spec. And so writing really, really well makes a huge difference in your effectiveness in a large corporation. And so if you one day decide to go to a big company and be a product manager, polish up your writing skills because that's super important. I do, yeah. I think I'm learning very different things. I'm also on camera, so. But no, I think it's a great experience. Go ahead.
How important would you say tooling is processes and procedures? In the startup, I can imagine you guys are just doing whatever works.
Yeah.
As you scale, you can't just
Yeah.
Did you guys have any of that?
Yeah, so at my startup, we didn't have that much processes going on. We had our weekly sync ups, we had our Trello boards, all the basic things. At a big company, 100% is super important with processes, and I think that's something I've learned a lot for the last few months. If I were to do a startup all over again, I would actually implement more processes from the beginning. Not necessarily like debilitating processes, but like making sure that there is like check and balances, understanding risks. A lot of these things are kind of just given at a big company, but at a smaller company, I think is important. And I really didn't understand when people said like repeat entrepreneurs is much easier to do things, especially after you've like joined a big company. Now I really understand because like processes I think are actually underrated at startups. So go ahead.
You mentioned it's important to listen to your users.
Yeah.
What is the best way to reach them?
So when you have small customers, I kind of just email them. Yeah. And now at a big company, you can't do that anymore. There's like processes you kind of have to go through. So that's like kind of like a process I don't think is necessary. But just talk to them. Like I don't really have a better answer. You just message them, give them a gift card if they're talking to you. When you're like a smaller company, people want to be talking to the builder of the products, and so there should really be no excuse why you're not talking to your customers at a small startup. Yeah. Go ahead.
Coming from the startup to Twitch,
Yeah.
Like you're going from like very unstructured situation
Yeah.
to a very structured situation. What's been like the hardest thing over the course of the last few months in terms of that transition and like wrapping your head around bureaucracy and all that other stuff?
For the gamers in the room, it feels like I went from a shooter game like Overwatch to a game like Civilization, where it's more about like diplomacy and resource trading. And so like I think at a startup every day felt like you're trying to do whatever is the best for the company because that's what you had to do to survive. Twitch is not going to die if I do anything different today versus tomorrow. It's more about how do I. Unfortunately, I think the optimization a lot of people do at big companies is more about like how do you get visibility in the organization, how to climb the corporate ladder. And so now instead of everybody thinking about what is the best for the customers, a lot of times people are thinking like what is the best for me in climbing the ladder. And so with that understanding, that was the biggest problem because when I was at my startup, we're like, hey, we're all talking the same language, trying to do the best for customers. Here's what we need to do. And then the question becomes, okay, I don't think this is best for customer. Okay, why not? And you kind of discuss that. At a big company, you still say, is this the best for the customer? But then, a lot of times it might be, I don't think it's best for the customer, but really what they're saying is, this might be best for the customers, but this hurts my metrics. And so then you kind of now have to kind of understand where everybody is coming from, what their company metrics are, what their team's metrics are, and then work around that, and then sort of negotiate resources. And so that was sort of the biggest change. And then 2 was this whole writing thing. I just feel like I'm a document writer now, and so that's really important as well.
It almost like goes back to when you were talking about how Twitch benefited publishers.
Yeah.
And how that kind of back and forth helped Twitch. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now it's how does what I do benefit another team's leader, right. And then the other product manager.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I think everybody still has good intentions. People still want to do good for customers, but subconsciously, if you're, at a startup, you're banking on your company being successful because you care about your company being successful, and if it's not successful, your stocks are worth nothing, right? At a big company, is a small decision on a feature going to change my stock option at Amazon? Probably not. And so I think people just subconsciously just don't really optimize towards the best for customers. They have the good intentions too, though. So yeah. Go ahead.
I understand that. I'm from the game.
Oh, nice.
So I understand Borderlands 3 is putting hard time on Twitch and also like YouTuber, because of the leakage feature of their trailer. But so in terms of UGC content.
Yeah.
So I'm on the branding side. So I personally think, what is like infringement. Because if this trailer was made by a company and then it was posted out by YouTubers like we know and know this company, I think that's kind of like a infringement. But if I'm playing the game, like I myself, I have this control of my behaviors and actions within the gameplay. And there's a lot of games they have the video button that you can record the time sessions that you're playing the game, and they allow you to download it. So I mean, if that happens, I think it's because the player itself is involved in himself, and like personal intentions and actions in the game. So I would not call this like the copyrights only goes to the company, but also it's part of the work of the player. So like, what do you think? You know, what do you call like an IP infringement, or what are the sensitive issues that you might have in this IP at Twitch?
So I don't deal too much with copyright infringement, so I don't think I can be super helpful in responding. I do think, though, kind of going back to an earlier point, is that publishers have a lot of power, obviously. And so if they call something an IP infringement, it is. I mean, in our case, they literally changed the EULA, right? So like the publishers have a ton of power. I think this space itself, thinking about like how streamers' relationship with brands, with us, it's not really all figured out. I mean, it was a big case a few weeks ago, or actually maybe a month now. The largest streamer for Fortnite, so now not Ninja, but like this guy named Tfue. So he signed a contract with the FaZe Clan, which is a team, and according to this contract, FaZe Clan was entitled to 80% of all his sponsorship revenues. Like, that is like literally, I'm pretty sure, again, don't quote me on this, is illegal if you were to do it in like the entertainment industry, where there's like actually more structure around what is allowed and what is not allowed. So even though Twitch is a billion-dollar company and there's tens of millions of people watching Twitch every day, and it seems like a really formalized thing, there's still a lot of things that are not regulated, and I think we're still really just at the beginning of where esports can be. I think we will get to a point where the esports streamers and esports players and streamers have a union, and they'll have rules around these kind of things, but it's still too early, I think, to decide.
I believe there are a lot of people at Twitch who are avid gamers themselves. So I'm curious, how do you tap into this internal expertise when driving product decisions? And in the meantime, because it's a selected group, you probably want to avoid assumptions. I'm just curious.
Great, really good question. So this is an example where process is good. So we at Twitch, we go through a product development process, and so there's steps that are predetermined in the product development process. And so there's 2 checkpoints in the product development process that allows us to validate against biases. So one is we have a mandatory UXR, and so user experience research. And so we'll use something called usertesting.com, where we will actually have a high fidelity prototype. So a high fidelity prototype is something that generally people can kind of work around with, and it kind of works as intended, but it obviously doesn't have full functionality. And we'll send that out to our user base. And it's a randomly selected user base, so that we can get kind of pre-user feedback before we finalize the design. So that's checkpoint 1. And then there's checkpoint 2, which is staff testing. So before we release this to everybody on the platform, we usually have a 2-week cycle where Twitch staff on the site can test the feature on their computers as they use Twitch. And so we have these sort of 2 checkpoints, one with unbiased just Twitch users, and then one with more biased Twitch staff. And both that feedback is taken into account before we 100% launch the product.